Evolution, Chapter 15, Family. "Gwen!" Kevin screamed out, pulling himself free from the downed electrical pole. He raced to Jen's car, which was parked not far from the wreckage of the warehouse. He absorbed the metal the frame was made of. It was heat and blast resistant. It should get him in and out of the building with both girls, assuming either was still alive. He paused, pressing the built-in distress signal under the dashboard of Jen's car. It would alert any nearby plumber's badge that they were in desperate need of help. He raced into the wreckage. "Gwen! Jen!" he called out as he passed unharmed through the flames. He found them by the glow of Gwen's shield, luckily unshattered. He dug them out quickly as a plumber ship landed. They came out with fire suppressors, which was lucky, as neither Gwen or Kevin could risk moving Jen, who was still on the ground, bleeding. Gwen had pulled off her red sweater and was pressing it tight to the wound on her cousin's stomach. The medical team rushed in and had Jen on a stretcher on the ship in minutes. Kevin and Gwen boarded as well. Gwen's white button-up was splattered with red and her hands were shaking. Kevin grabbed a sterile wipe from one of the medical kits stashed all over the ship. He took Gwen's hands in his own and cleaned her cousin's blood off of them. She was still shaking. He held her close. "It's okay, we got to her in time." She buried her head in his chest, and it was like a dam broke. Her hands curled into his shirt, and she sobbed with abandon. They were met at the base by a full medical team and Grandpa Max. He pulled both Kevin and Gwen in close as the medical team raced away with Jen. "They called ahead. We have our top doctors waiting for her. She's gonna be okay," Max assured them both, bundling them into his small living space. There was a full wing of apartments for plumbers living and working on base. Max had the one closest to the main control room. He sat them both down on the couch and paced. "What happened? I haven't seen Jen hurt like that since..." He trailed off, but Gwen finished his sentence for him. "The first time Vilgax got a hold of her." Max nodded as Kevin pulled Gwen closer and began to explain what had happened. Once the Osmosian had finished, Max nodded. "I need to make a few calls. Kevin, you keep an eye on Gwen. I'll have medical buzz you as soon as she's awake." Kevin nodded as Gwen curled up into his side, seemingly determined to make herself as small as possible. He pulled her into his lap and gently stroked her hair. She managed to sob herself to sleep, and he just kept holding her. At this point, he was just glad she was alive. Jen's world was blurry when she woke up. For once, nothing hurt. There was no secondary presence in her mind, and she felt like she had just slept for ages. Everything was groggy, and she couldn't focus right. It took her brain a minute or two to identify the symptoms. She'd been drugged. She made a distressed noise in the back of her throat. What if Agrigor had decided to take all of them? If she was lucky, he'd have just taken her. She tried to sit up and nearly keeled off the bed she was on. Wait, bed? Agrigor didn't seem like the kind of captor who shelled out for comfort for his captives. Her stomach gave a twinge and she heard voices outside the door. She grabbed hold of the IV stand and managed to right herself onto shaking feet. She made it most of the way to the door when it opened. Her vision was still slightly blurry and she didn't recognize the figures in the doorway. She tried to get away from them when a much larger figure in red appeared in the doorway. He was quicker than the others and grabbed her by the elbows. "It's okay, Jen. You're okay." She barely heard him. With the red shirt now close to her, she recognized the garish yellow flowers of the Hawaiian print and relaxed, nearly collapsing into his arms. "Hey, Grandpa," she slurred out, barely distinguishable, but he seemed to get it. He picked her up with little difficulty and set her back on the bed. It was just then that she realized she wasn't wearing her regular clothes. Her stomach was bandaged and she was wearing a hospital gown. She blinked, and the rest of the events came back to her. Agrigor digging his spear into Brainstorm and knocking Gwen out, the explosion. She struggled to get back to her feet. Grandpa Max gently held her shoulder down to the bed. "You can't get up right now, kiddo." She shook her head at him. Words were slippery and hard to get a hold of, but she managed it. "Gwen... Kev..." She couldn't seem to form Kevin's full name, but her point came through, and he nodded. "Both fine." One of the doctors is messaging them now. They'll be here any minute. As if summoned, the door burst open and Gwen led the charge into the room. Kevin so close behind her, it was a wonder they weren't tripping over each other. Both rushed to her bedside, and she relaxed completely. Max stepped away from the bed and over to the doctor. She'll be all right. He nodded, magenta stars on marble skin winking. The damage was quite extensive, but we managed to heal her perforated liver. Most of the rest of the damage is superficial. She needed a transfusion. If the three of you can keep her calm while that's happening, that would be best. She's on some heavy-duty painkillers. I'll be making a note about it in her file. We had to give her a low dose of accessorian painkillers. Nothing else worked. To be frank with you, Magister, if it wasn't for her altered physiology, I wouldn't have even risked it. Even in a small dose, it can kill a human. Max nodded. That'll be her increased metabolism at work. It's one of the more prevalent side effects of the Ultimatrix. I'm never going to get used to that. The doctor nodded. But aside from that, she'll be all right, though the scar won't be pretty. Sadly, she's used to that. Thank you, Doctor. He nodded and left the room so Jen could be alone with her family. Chapter 16. Planning. The next morning found the trio sitting in Max's office. He didn't have much good news for them. Agrigor's vanished. Jen swore. Max nodded. It gets worse. We checked out the spot where you left by Valvin, found the plumber who went to collect him. He's dead, and his armor's gone. No one can find the listing of who took out the ship that was supposed to take Galapagos home, and to top it all off, the ship that had Pandora on it was attacked. Lost all hands. Jen buried her head in her hands. So, as of right now, we have to assume that Agrigor has all of them. Gwen frowned. Except Andreas, right? Max shook his head. No. The Forever Night castle that Andreas tore down, we sifted through the whole thing. Never found his body. Kevin swore. Shit. What's his endgame, though? Becoming all-powerful? He'd have had more luck absorbing the Ultimatrix energy for that. Max nodded. We know. That's what we don't understand. We got every feeler out for him. He so much as passes by Plummer's space, we'll know about it. Jen nodded. When he pops back up, I want a piece of him. Max frowned. I understand that. Jen shook her head. No, you don't. I promised them I'd get them home. They trusted me and it bit them. I'm going to make sure I keep my promise. Max sighed, knowing that he would be unable to talk her out of it. All right, I'll let you know when we find them. But, for now, business as usual. How are you feeling? He asked, his voice softening. I'm fine. Everyone raised an eyebrow at her. She rolled her eyes. Physically, all healed. Got another scar, so bikinis are definitely off the table now, but I'm fine. And I just had the best night's sleep I've had in weeks. So yeah, I'm ready to go. Max shook his head. Nowhere to go for now. You should take it easy. Go do something fun and normal. Jen sighed as Kevin leaned forward. Jennifer Nocturne's coming into town for a book signing. Jen let out a belt of laughter. I honestly forgot about your obsession with her. Sounds like fun, though. Why not? Gwen nodded, though she looked a little incensed that Kevin was obsessed with the movie star. It was supposed to be relaxing. Jennifer Nocturne was not supposed to nearly be kidnapped. Jen, never one to stand aside when trouble was afoot, intervened, taking down all but one of the kidnappers. The last one tried to run, caught by Gwen and Kevin easily. It was about then that one of Jen's childhood heroes showed up. Captain Nemesis was tall and impressive in his armor. Jen was practically bouncing with excitement. Oh, wow, Captain Nemesis, I'm one of your biggest fans. His smile was close to a sneer, but Jen didn't notice. Her hand was grabbed and she turned to find Jennifer Nocturne standing very much in her personal bubble, beaming a brilliantly white smile. She smelled like honey and cinnamon, her golden hair waving in a breeze. Jen 10, I'm one of your biggest fans. Then her hands were on Jen's face, and before Jen could blink, the blonde's lips were on hers. There were several wolf whistles from the crowd that had been gathered for the signing. Jen thought she heard Kevin make a noise, but it was very difficult to focus with a tongue in her mouth. Miss Nocturne pulled back first, and Jen blinked dumbly, sort of unsure what had just happened. The movie star blushed. Sorry, I got so caught up in the moment. You saved my life. Jen shook her head. It's okay. Before she could say more, Jennifer Nocturne grabbed her hand and waved at the crowd. Jen waved too, and they went wild. Kevin and Gwen slipped back into their place in line, keen to stay out of the spotlight. Traitors, Jen thought to herself as she was pulled into the bookshop by Miss Nocturne. The movie star practically begged her to sit with her at the table the shop had set up for her. The bookshop didn't seem to mind as they quickly sold out of quite a few science fiction titles. Jen had to be honest, getting to sign a copy of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy was both an honor and a little trippy. When Gwen and Kevin showed up at the table, Jen introduced them and Miss Nocturne smiled. I hope you don't mind me stealing her for the rest of the night. Can't have my hero going unrewarded. She winked at Jen, who went bright red. Gwen held back her laugh, and Kevin looked a little starstruck and slightly jealous, nodded. Not a problem at all. The movie star grinned and finished signing Kevin's copy of Dawnfall. Jen rolled her eyes at them as they made their way out of the line, bypassing her, which she didn't mind. They saw her every day, after all. She signed a notebook and smiled a little awkwardly at the guy asking for her autograph. What felt like days later, Jen was sure her hand was going to fall off. Kevin and Gwen had left, but Jennifer Nocturne offered her a ride in her golden limo. I'd like to take you out to dinner tomorrow night, if you don't mind. To thank you. Jen nodded. I'd like that, but I should tell you I'm not in a good place for a relationship right now. Jennifer Nocturne deflated. Because you don't like girls? Jen shook her head. No, I like both. Everything, really. It's just, I recently lost someone close to me and I'm still dealing with that. She fiddled with the ring on her necklace as the blonde movie star perked back up. Oh, I completely understand. But can I still take you to dinner? Jen nodded. I'd like that. They had arrived at her house and Jen left the limo and waved. She heard a throat clear behind her. She turned and found Julie sitting on the front step. Jen frowned. They hadn't had any plans that day. You are all over the news right now. Your makeout session with Jennifer Nocturne is literally the only thing anyone is talking about, and I want details. Jen sighed and unlocked the front door. Her mother was at work. Her father was in the garage working on one of the old plumber guns he'd found in the attic. It wasn't a makeout. She was just happy I saved her. Julie frowned as Jen fiddled with the ring on her necklace. She caught her friend's hand again. You know you're allowed to be happy again, right? Jen flinched. Julie had hit the nail on the head. Jen was feeling guilty. Ethan had died in August, just 8 months ago. Julie caught Jen's hand. I get that it might be too soon. I do. But you're allowed to find happiness again. He would want you to. Jen flopped down onto the couch, face planted into the cushions. Julie moved her legs and sat down. She patted her friend on her back. Jen stayed buried in the couch for a while.